down through verse 22, talking about the difficulty of isolation that a lot of people feel in illness or in trials. Verse 13, he hath put my brethren far from me, and mine acquaintance are verily estranged from me. My kinfolk have failed, and my familiar friends have forgotten me. They that dwell in mine house and my maids count me for a stranger. I am an alien in their sight. I called my servant, and he gave me no answer. I entreated him with my mouth. My breath is strange to my wife, though I entreated for the children's sake of mine own body. Yea, young children despised me. I arose, and they spake against me. All my inward friends abhorred me, and they whom I loved are turned against me. My bone cleaveth to my skin and to my flesh, and I am escaped with the skin of my teeth. Have pity upon me, O ye my friends, for the hand of God hath touched me. Why do ye persecute me as God, and are not satisfied with my flesh? Let's bow for a word of prayer. Father, this evening as we consider this passage, sometimes it is easy to gang up on people who are already hurting and having a hard time. But your Holy Spirit has instructed us multiple times that we are supposed to be comforters. We are supposed to come alongside and to help people. And you've said that they will know we are Christians by our love, and godly love chooses to treat people differently than fleshly love. So help us to sympathize with Job and to look into our own hearts in the way that we encourage and support people, especially in their toughest times. In Jesus' name, amen. I hope we're going to get some rain here before long. Yesterday I looked, it said 9 o'clock in the morning, then it was 11 o'clock, then it was sometime this afternoon, then 5 o'clock. I'm like, this is a parched and thirsty land. We started this chapter here in the first 5 verses, response to insults. Basically, Job is talking to his friends, face to face about how harsh they've been. And then in 6 through 12, he says, boys, I don't have to die. The trials of life are pretty rough, in case you haven't noticed. And now he's talking about the difficulty of isolation. And Bildad switched gears and tried to come at Job instead of shame and with fear. And it's almost as if Job is doing the same thing, and he is kind of switching gears and saying, everything that I have tried to say, everything that I have done to encourage you to consider being a little compassionate, what if you could feel what I feel and walked a mile in my shoes? He starts off with the top part of this, and he talks about loss of relationships. What's really interesting is when he starts off verse 13, he says, he hath put my brethren far from me. A direct statement that he recognizes this is a punishment from God. And the reason I say that's interesting is because I figure Job probably had to be a social individual. We would call him a people person. I think, from history we know that he took care of folks and was a very generous man, not to mention that he was just and righteous. I think he was a people person. And so relationships really mattered to him. And he thought that many of the relationships that he's getting ready to talk about would normally stay true. Because how bad would something have to be before you would abandon the type of person that he's talking about? And so before he starts saying, this is a pretty rough situation, y'all, and I wish you could feel a little bit of this because maybe you would think differently. He starts off and he recognizes that this is something that is from God. And if God weren't involved, then I get the feeling that Job feels like all of these people wouldn't have abandoned him. And so when he gets down to the very end and he's kind of talking directly to his closest friends, his inner circle. It's almost like he's telling them, I know y'all don't understand, but part of the punishment is that obviously I have to bear up under how mean y'all are instead of helping me through this. So let's dig into this and we'll go verse by verse here. Verse 13, brethren and acquaintances, and he takes two groups of individuals in each of these as he goes down through. What I want you to notice is he starts with a broad category, okay? And then as we work our way down, he's going to narrow it in so that it becomes more personal and more personal and more personal as he goes. Brethren, we think of this and we'd say, well, that's his brothers. That's not what he's talking about at all. It probably would have been better if they had translated a different term here, like countrymen. Townfolk, maybe even, would be a better description. These are the business people that he would have dealt with on a fairly regular basis. You got to go sell your grain, or you got to go buy seed, or your, nowadays fertilizer, paying for fuel, filling up the car, all those types of things. And so you have all of these folks that, the salesman that drops by wants to sell you a couch or a refrigerator, the person at the post office, the folks at the bank. These are kind of the broad range folks. You see them out and about, you know them, they know you, but they're not the folks that you go to, with all your intimate secrets and your hurts and things like that. Those are the ones that you have casual conversation with during the course of the day. And what's interesting is he says, he hath put them far away. He hath put my brethren far from me. So in other words, he's saying, God has moved in such a way that they have been alienated from me. They want nothing to do with me, even though I am sure that before the fateful day when everything started going south, if Job were walking down the street, probably most everybody would have said hi, shook his hand, greeted him in some way, shape, or form, stopped to talk a little bit, because he was an important person in town, and I believe he was a people person. But think about it. Here you are, all these folks that you used to, and now all of a sudden, they stop waving. People are walking by and they see you go into the post office and they don't say hello. Or they catch you over here in the grocery store, and as you're going up one aisle, you notice they dart down the other aisle and came back up the same one they just came down, as if they're desperately looking for something and, trying to avoid you. That's the feeling that you get here from verse 13. And then you get to verse 14, and he has two more. He calls them kinsmen and familiar friends. And he's going to use that familiar friends twice. A kinsman, the word literally means near one. We would call him a neighbor. Okay, this isn't your cousins and that kind of kinsfolk. These are your neighbors. And so what he's saying here is, my kinsfolk have failed. Failed what? Well, they failed to be friendly. They failed to be neighborly. In other words, he's saying nobody visits, nobody checks on me, nobody offers help. I remember stayed with my grandfather for a while to help him out, and one of the neighbors up there broke his leg. And the neighbors would take turns milking the cows morning and night, and we cut down a tree over in the field and drug it quite a ways up to his house, pulled it up near his house for firewood, and people were calling on him, this is Tuesday, we better check on, this is Friday, we better check on, have you seen so-and-so out and about today, is the yard mowed? Just the typical things that a close-knit community would notice if something were going on with a neighbor. And then you have familiar friends, and this word means to know. Family friends, the folks you would have over for a game night, your golfing buddies, the folks that you would hunt and fish with together, go camping, those type of things. Whole lot narrower than the broad category of folks you see in town or at a ball game and wave to and say hi to. He's getting closer and closer. And look at the description. They count me for jump down one. My familiar friends have forgotten me. They neglect me. They disregard me. The word literally means to put from one's memory. Here's Job, and he's sitting out on the trash heap probably, and he's been scratching himself, and he looks nasty. I'm sure he smells nasty, and I'm sure he absolutely feels nasty, because we know from previous discussions he feels like he doesn't have very long to live. And you would think that as people were going about their daily activities that they would say something or be an encouragement, and they just walk on by him like they don't even know the guy. Never seen him, don't know where he lives, don't know what he does. In verse 15, you come up to the next two, sojourners and servants. They that dwell in mine house and my maids count me for a stranger. I am an alien in their sight. Now, some people think because it says maids that he's talking about long-term servants, and it's possible. But the word is often used of someone that sojourned in your house. In other words, folks that have stopped in my house and stayed, a couple of nights and enjoyed my hospitality. They have benefited from my generosity. They're traveling through on their way to so-and-so. Well, let's stop in and see Job and his wife. And so they stop and spend a couple of days and check out the farm and ride the camels or whatever, and then on they go again. And what's interesting is you can tell that the hurt is getting more personal, because he says, they count me for a stranger. They treat me as if they don't know me at all. And they've stayed in my house. And I have been generous with them, but they are not willing to reciprocate the help. It's almost like, well, we're going to be traveling down to, Job's having a hard time. Let's make sure we go over to so-and-so so we don't even have to be close. Not stop in and check and see him. And you can tell that the offense is getting more personal and more personal as we go. The second part, the maids, live and work in the house. And it is very interesting to me, although we're going to break this up a little bit. In this verse and in the next one, maids is female, servants male. And I believe that's intentional, because he is saying the maids that work and live in the house would have known him really well on a daily basis. I mean, who would be more intimately involved with the family modern days than like a live-in nanny or somebody, butlers and the maids, if you had that kind of a house that you had those folks. They would see the way you reacted with company. They would see the way that you conducted business. They would see the way you interacted with your own family members. And so they would know you very personally on a daily basis. And I believe he's saying the girls here because they're usually prone to tender care and compassionate hearts. And so, he's saying, boy, you really start taking this personally, because the folks that you thought would be compassionate and tender-hearted towards you and who live in your house and know you the best treat me like a complete stranger. And we're going to jump 16 and go down to verse 17 because he's going to draw the circle all the way in tight. And he talks about family. And again, I want to remind you, we have been working from broad to close. And so as the folks who don't know you as well are running off and leaving you, it hurts a little bit. And then it keeps coming in and coming in and coming in, and you had folks who stayed overnight in your house or had that kind of a close relationship with you. You have maids who lived in your house and saw you on a daily basis, but then obviously the closest is family. And he says, my breath is strange to my wife. Two trains of thought here. Some of them say his breath was so awful that she didn't want to be around. So there's no kissing and cuddling. There's no supportive relationship there. There's no, you got COVID, you sit over there, put your mask on type thing. Don't want to have anything to do with. Or several of the commentaries said it's quite possible that she hasn't been around much. And so I am like a stranger to her. My breath, what I would say, or just being in my presence to even know I'm breathing is strange to her, because that's how little she comes to check on me or visit me. And maybe he's saying, I have no one to talk to. It could quite possibly be what he's saying here. The second part, and this verse is really tough, but especially this part of it. Though I entreated for the children's sake of mine own body. You have some say that this is referring to brothers because it's children of his mother. I don't think so. I really have a hard time seeing that because he's talking about children's sake of his own body, not of his own mother's body. Some say, a stranger to my wife, even though I tried to comfort and console her because of the kids. And so they're saying, well, I tried to talk to my wife and I know she's hurting, and I tried to comfort her and I tried to console her, but I'm still like a stranger to her. She doesn't want to have anything to do with me. And the implication there would be that she believes that Job is responsible for it. God is punishing you, and because whatever you did, that God is punishing you is so harsh, you wiped out the kids, I'll never forgive you for it, type of a situation. Most likely, as I'm studying this, and again, it's pretty hard to cross-reference some of these words, because a lot of the words that are used here are only used in Job, so it's not like you can chase them through the Old Testament and see how they're used in other places. But most likely it's younger children that were not old enough to be with the older ones when they were killed. And so if you think about that aspect of it, what he has done here is he has brought the circle down to say, well, my wife is either strange to me or doesn't want to be around me because my breath stinks, whatever the reason is, and the little kids are afraid of me and they don't want to be around either. It has to be the most painful of all of the isolation that he is feeling and the things that he's dealing with. Kids can be a joy. When Tater comes up and he's running through the house and having a big time and laughing and giggling, doesn't matter how bad a day you had, just makes your day better. It doesn't matter if you're not feeling well, doesn't matter whatever it is. The joy of a youngster running around, and it seems like Job is saying, I don't have any of that. So you can tell the loss of relationships is weighing heavily on him. Then we're going to back up to verse 16 and then jump down to verse 18, because I feel like these two are loss of respect. In verse 16, you have employees, servants. We would call them employees. Obviously, they are mostly servants. I called my servant, and the term is masculine, and he gave me no answer. Now, you think about this in context of Job's day, or even our day. You see an employee walking by and you holler for him and tell him to do something, and he ignores you or disobeys your request when you ask. Wouldn't that jump all over you? Obviously they don't have enough respect, even though, a little while ago they would have, yes sir, I'll get right on that, or I'll let you know as soon as it's done, or whatever. But then the implication goes a little farther, because look at the end of the verse. I entreated him with my mouth. In other words, he says, I begged, and they ignored. That is the complete opposite response of a normal relationship. Doesn't matter if it's an employee or a servant. If there's a servant in Job's day and he's running around getting ready to do something from the field or fix something in the house and Job called for him, man, they would hop to and come. And because it's not the servant's will, it's the master's will. And so there's a total role reversal here where they are ignoring him as if he doesn't matter. Total loss of respect. Then in verse 18, young children. Yea, young children despised me. I arose and they spake against me. And normally, especially back in that day, you would respect your elders. And the term that's used here is they spurn or they reject, which is the opposite of appreciating the wisdom of an older person. And when I arose, when I attracted their attention, then they responded to me in a way that was completely inappropriate because they respond with mockery and derision. Now I want you to go to 2 Kings chapter 2 and verse 23. In 2 Kings chapter 2 and verse 23, we see a similar situation. In verse 24, God deals with it pretty harshly. Talking about Elisha, he went up from thence unto Bethel, and as he was going up by the way, there came forth little children, same word, out of the city, and mocked him, and said unto him, Go up, thou bald head, go up, thou bald head. Now you can hear the kids making fun of Elisha as he goes, right? And he turned back and looked on them and cursed them in the name of the Lord. And there came forth 2 she-bears out of the woods, and terror 42 children of them. Is that a normal situation? I mean, if bears were to come out there and start going after kids, they wouldn't normally stand there and shred 42 kids. Okay? And so you have a situation here where somebody is obviously in mockery and disrespect of an older person, and in this case the man of God, Elisha. And Job says, well, man, I feel that way, but I don't see any she-bears coming out and eating any of these kids, and teaching them a little respect, if you will. He just is suffering with it. And you can tell that it's wearing on him. Then the third thing that I see is the lack of sympathy and understanding, verses 19 through 22. All my inward friends abhorred me. He's feeling rejected and alone. This is his friend group, his inner circle, his closest friends. And the word here is interesting because abhor means to morally detest me. Treat me as if I am guilty of sin, and because I'm guilty of sin, then I'm guilty and deserving of this punishment. Now, what we know from Job beforehand, this is a complete 180 of the way people viewed him. So you can imagine how he feels in this situation. No one to confide in, no one to rely on, no one to help bear the burden, because this is your inner circle, your closest friends. And then he says, and they whom I loved are turned against me. Love is an action word. You are investing in the lives of others, time, effort, energy, thinking about them in some way or remembering something. Then it says they turned their back on me, so he is feeling absolutely betrayed. He could sit there in agony, suffering, and think of times as every person walked by and said, man, I used to do this for so-and-so, and I used to do this for so-and-so, and now these folks are acting like they don't even know him. Verse 20, repulsive and ignored. He's probably feeling very repulsive and ignored. My bone cleaveth to my skin and to my flesh, and I am escaped with the skin of my teeth. He is so ill, he is a sack of skin and bones. And I was sitting here studying thinking, we've probably all seen pictures of prisoners of war who aren't fed very much, or Holocaust survivors. And when they come walking out of those camps, you sit there and just shake your head and wonder, how in the world are they even alive? And that's what Job's describing himself as. Well, it looks like he's a Holocaust survivor, a prisoner of war. I'm sure it was ghastly to look upon. But I'm telling you, I can't look at a prisoner of war picture or a Holocaust survivor picture and sit there and think, man, that person deserved to be, right? The milk of human kindness in you, you think, how in the world could anybody treat another human being like that? And so, if Job's not being treated with any dignity or respect, and then he obviously has to be repulsive, and he is feeling ignored. I am escaped. Now, this is another interesting one, because some people think that he is saying, I narrowly escaped death by the skin of my teeth. And there are a lot of these Middle Eastern axioms and sayings all throughout Job. Quite an awful lot of them. So it's quite possible. But he also might be saying that all of his skin is nasty and afflicted except his mouth, and particularly his gums. And you say, what's the big deal? Well, that would be a strong statement, because that means that the devil would have spared his mouth so that he could curse God, which was the whole point of the suffering. I mean, if his jaw was disfigured and his gums were all messed up and his tongue was a mess, if he did cry out against God, people might have a hard time understanding it. But it's almost as if Job's saying, boy, everything about me is a miserable, nasty mess except for my mouth. And it's possible. The last part of this section is verse 21 and 22. He's feeling reproached. Have pity upon me. Have pity upon me, O ye my friends, for the hand of God hath touched me. It's almost as if he's looking these three guys right in the face and saying, am I so awful that I don't deserve pity? So commonly given to anyone suffering like this? Am I so awful that I don't deserve pity? Why do ye persecute me as God, and are not satisfied with my flesh? Am I so awful that you all think I deserve this? What happened to the relationship we had? You know, it's almost like you flipped a switch. In one day, all this awful stuff happened to Job, and then we don't know how much later, but all of a sudden his health deteriorates. And however long it took, whether it was the next day or a week later or whatever it was, goodness, it seems like all these friends just flipped a switch, and now they think something completely different of Job than they did before. And so his cry is, haven't I suffered enough? Why are you adding more mental anguish to my physical anguish? That's the statement that he makes in verse 22. Why do you persecute me mentally like God is persecuting me physically? Why aren't you satisfied with the destruction of my body that you have to destroy my insides as well? You just have to shred any bit of dignity or respect or friendship or anything that I had left. Isn't it enough to suffer the way I've suffered? Now, before we close, I want to throw a note in here. Because in Jesus' day, the religious elites hated him. Because in Matthew chapter 9, he ate with publican and sinners. And the fancy do-gooders just didn't do that kind of stuff. In Matthew chapter 8, he touched lepers, and everybody knows that lepers are unclean. I mean, they're just nasty. Why would you want to associate? If you're going to heal them from a distance, but walk up and touch one of those nasty folks, that's grody to the max. And in Luke chapter 7, he accepted a gift from a woman of ill repute and didn't treat her disdainfully. It's amazing, right? But I want to close by going to Isaiah chapter 53. A prophetic chapter talking about Jesus. And yet it tells us how society, as by and large, was going to treat him. Isaiah 53 and verse 3. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. I feel like Job is feeling this a little bit, right? Says, listen, you would think that you would understand Jesus' suffering, but we hid, as it was, our faces from him. We turned our faces away from him. We treated him like he was a stranger. We didn't want to look on him in that type of a situation, and we esteemed him not. The cross was not meant to be something that lifted him up and elevated him. It was supposed to be the ugliest way to die and the most demeaning way to die. Only after the resurrection does the cross become this symbol of hope and life in him. But that's not what it was meant to be. So when people are hurting and they are down and they are really struggling, let's remember that it can be tough to feel rejected and alone and repulsive and ignored and reproached. Blessed is that person that comes alongside, wraps their arm around and gives an encouraging word and prays with you and offers a little help and a little strength, because Job's right. Isn't the physical suffering enough? Why all the social and mental anguish besides? Praises or prayer requests tonight?